Hi, this is Kelly Sadler, the commentary editor at the Washington Times, and welcome to Politically Unstable. Today, my guests are Sebastien Lai and Mark Simon. Sebastien is the son of Jimmy Lai, who is a political prisoner being held in Hong Kong. And for our audience that's not familiar with this case and hasn't been following it throughout the years, could you just describe your father's plight, what happened to him, and where things stand today? Because his trial just ended.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So my father landed in Hong Kong from communist China when he was 12 as a child stowaway. He then, as he tells it, became in love with the freedoms because in Hong Kong, even though he had nothing when he landed, he knew that he had hope, he had a future. He then became incredibly successful in business, in textile manufacturing, and then in clothing retail. But 1989 came about with the Tiananmen Square massacre, and my father was completely heartbroken. He was when the pro-democracy protests were happening, he was very supportive, and so he knew that, as China was liberating economically, that it wasn't going to liberate
Socially.
Socially, exactly. And he knew the implications for Hong Kong, his adoptive home. So he felt a need to start a newspaper to defend these freedoms in Hong Kong and to campaign for democracy in Hong Kong. So he founded Apple Daily. And the idea was, with information, there's choice, and with choice, there's freedom. Mm-hmm. And Apple Daily became the most successful newspaper in Hong Kong. It was the largest media group, and that's what him and his employees did for the next 25 years. Spoke truth to power. And then the 2019 protests happened. My father was, went out and campaigned for democracy during the protest. And then the national security law came. And with the national security law, the Hong Kong government decided to weaponize their legal system against these pro-democracy protests. Everybody told my father to leave. They told him that he was going to be one of the people that they were going to target. But he knew that by leaving, not only would he be leaving his principles behind, but more practically, he'd be leaving his employees behind.
So let's just, for our viewers, Hong Kong had a special carve-out from China. It was always considered one China, one country, two rules of law, basically. In China, the mainland was controlled by the CCP, the authoritarian aspects of that. There's never been freedom of press. There's really not been a lot of foreign direct investment in the mainland. But Hong Kong was a place that was British ruled, was democratic, and allowed a lot of companies to come in and as an entry point into China. But that all changed in 2019. You saw the authoritarian hand of the CCP it took control of Hong Kong.
Yeah, exactly. So Hong Kong was it was one country, two system. Hong Kong never had democracy, but it had a lot of the things that people would associate with
Western
democracy.
values.
Western values, exactly. So the free press, the rule of law, and when the national security law passed, it was a internationally decried law, incredibly draconian. But essentially, it meant that if the authorities didn't like you, they would find reasons to arrest you. So my father was arrested. They sent hundreds of police officers to raid his newsrooms. So if you type in Apple Daily Raid, you'd see 500 police officers going into the biggest newspaper in Hong Kong and raiding it and arresting a few of his colleagues. It's
essentially shutting it down.
Essentially shutting it down, yes.
So how long has your dad been in prison for?
My father has been in prison since the end of 2020. He's held in solitary confinement and has been the whole entire time. And at 77, he's soon to be 78, we're incredibly worried about it.
And your father, there hasn't been that many public images of him. since he's been held in solitary confinement. We know in Hong Kong the summer's 90 to 100 degree heat. We know that there's no air conditioning in his cell. The one window that he did have, they've blacked out because of the media interest in your father and what he symbolizes. But he's also diabetic. Yeah. And he's had to have a heart monitor. I've read reports. I mean, you said he's 77 years old. He's not getting out, exercising. He's being held in a room by himself. How concerned are you that he can survive this?
Oh, we're incredibly worried about him. I mean, look, you take me. Right? I'm 30. You put me in those circumstances. The odds on in my favor. This is a 77-year-old man. He's close to 80. These are absolutely horrible conditions to keep him in. I mean, everybody during the summer knows that if you turn the air conditioning off at 90, 100 degrees, it's hot. Yeah. And he's in a little concrete cell and it traps the heat. So essentially, he bakes in there. This is a man who knows he did the right thing. Yeah. He knows the right thing, and he did the right thing by himself, by God. He's very religious. He's Catholic. So these two elements of his life, they are his pillar. But despite that, he's still in the body of a 70-year-old, soon to be 70-year-old man, and so we're incredibly worried. And so
the trial just ended, but you're awaiting a verdict.
Yep. So almost 5 years in, the National Security Law trial, which.
And do you anticipate that this has been a fair trial and that he will be found not guilty, or are the cards against him and you're concerned that no matter what your case was, it's not going to be heard? He'll be sentenced to 10 years. And he could potentially die in prison.
Even if he gets 5 years, it's practically a death sentence. It's a completely unfair trial. These are the facts. There's 3 government-appointed judges. There's no jury. There's allegations of witnesses being tortured to give evidence. So there's no chance he's ever going to get a fair. There's no chance he's ever going to get a fair trial. In fact. Having been there for almost 5 years, he's had multiple sham sentences against him, one of which was related to a Tiananmen Square massacre vigil where he lit a candle and said a prayer for these people that died. And for that, he got more than a year in prison.
So, Mark, I want to bring you into this conversation because we're at a point right now where international action is needed. President Xi of China obviously views Sebastian's father as a threat. You are all in Washington, D.C. To speak on behalf of his release. Your father is a British citizen. He's not a U.S. citizen. Mark, what is needed from the international bodies? All of the international bodies that have reviewed your father's case have come down on the side of your father and said that he should not be imprisoned and that this is a gross human, rights violation that China is doing. But China, Mark, doesn't seem to care what international bodies say. So kind of where are we and what is needed to free Jimmy Lai?
Well, at this point in time, the international community has spoke really as loudly as you possibly would expect them to in terms of, and with unison, that Jimmy Lai should be freed. What takes now is a little bit of leadership and a little bit of just basically dedication to the cause of freeing him. Fortunately for us, President Trump has taken up Jimmy Lai's cause. And President Trump is not new to Jimmy Lai. President Trump commented on Jimmy as far back as 2019, so he knows who the man is. And he's obviously somewhat of an admirer of Jimmy. But we're an admirer of the way President Trump has basically started to change a large part of foreign policy in the world in terms of getting hostages out and basically making nations responsible for their behavior. So for Xi Jinping, he's basically got a situation where the case against Jimmy Lai never really materialized. In other words, that Xi Jinping sees Jimmy Lai as a threat is somewhat based on false propositions. We did not cause trouble in China. Jimmy basically only campaigned on one thing. It's called the enforcement of a contract. We had a contract, the Hong Kong people had a contract called the Basic Law with China. The Brits signed it in 1997, 50 years. Basically, the whole argument was, and we used to joke about it around the table, let's just get it as close as we can to 2047. After that, if we can't get anything, well, then we can't get anything. They cut it off in basically 2019. So that's what Jimmy was looking for. I think the Chinese, I hope, are starting to understand this. I know that the international community understands this. But what it continues to take is, I'm not so sure it's things of using the stick all the time. It's basically talking to the Chinese and say, if you can't release this man, it's going to be very difficult for us to move forward on almost any other front. And I think that's what this administration understands, and that's why they're there. We want to do business with China. Nobody's saying we shouldn't do business with China. Jimmy's a big Milton Friedman pro-free trade guy. He doesn't think we should not do business with China. But it makes it hard when the rule of law and just basic international norms are completely kicked to the side because of a political agenda that doesn't really make sense.
So if she decides, under political pressure from President Trump, and he levels it all the time, and Keir Starmer, we know that President Trump will be traveling for a state visit to London next week. You could argue that President Trump really doesn't have a stake in this, in the fact that Jimmy is not a U.S. citizen and he's an America First guy. However, this did happen during his first administration, this crackdown in Hong Kong. And he's still looking to get a trade deal and work with President Xi, of whom he has a good relationship with. President Trump has also said he'll do everything that he can do to free your dad. But then on one interview, he said, Xi isn't going to like it. How do you see this progressing, and what are the hopes you have? Because I feel as though time is of the essence right now. First to you, Sebastien, then to you, Mark.
Look, I think the president obviously greatly cares about this case because, given the same situation, I think many people see themselves in my father's plight. Many people sees this man who's given everything to defend freedom and stayed there to protect his employees. And I think that's something that speaks to the president, speaks to many people here in America. And I think we are in a situation now where to Mark's point, it's everybody's benefit that my father's freed. He's been there for 5 years. All these allegations were leveled against him. Well, it turns out all these allegations were wrong. There's no evidence basis, and the United Nations have called for his release. Multiple countries have called for his release. And, as you said, anybody looking at this sees that this is a man that needs to be freed.
And if I have this correct, he said if he's released from solitary confinement in Hong Kong, he will leave Hong Kong. He will not stay there.
The man stayed to act as a lightning rod for his employees. That was it. There's no, he knew his responsibility. He knew his beliefs, and he knew that these people were going to be attacked if he left. So he stayed to protect them.
And Mark, I'm going to change the question just a bit. What if he's not freed? What if he's sentenced to 10 years and he dies in prison there? What does that mean for geopolitical relationships between the Western world and communist China?
What it means is they've taken a man who's a moderate in every way. He's pro-freedom, he's pro-democracy, he wants a contract upheld. What it means is they've created a martyr. They've created something that we are never going to be able to control. He's going to be on T-shirts. He's going to be everywhere. He's going to become a symbol of resistance that the Chinese probably don't want to create. And also for the U.S. and the rest of the world, the fact of the matter is every time somebody looks to do a piece of business with China, they're going to go, you know what? I remember the last time this guy invested billions of U.S. dollars. lost everything to an administrative order from the Security Department because it was never a judicial judgment against Jimmy and for it to take his property. So I think it's bad news. I think it's bad news all the way around. Getting back to the first question, I think one of the ways to move forward here is Keir Starmer and President Trump have a very good relationship. If I was advising the Brits and the Americans, maybe the Prime Minister says to President Trump, hey, we both have an interest in this commercially and humanitarianly, and he's one of my citizens. Can you help me free one of our subjects? Can we, the United States and Great Britain, do this together? Mm-hmm. And I think that would be a very powerful incentive. And I think Xi Jinping, and they just say to him, look, we're actually doing you a favor here. This is an opportunity for you to clear this guy off the channel. I can't begin to imagine, after I talk to my Chinese historical friends, they say it's a real issue if something happens bad to Jimmy in there. There's something that China will pay for a long, long time. You know, we look what happened with Liu Xiaobo, the Nobel Prize winner. Still to this day, he inspires demonstrations and things like that. But Jimmy is a moderate. That's what people have to. That's the most thing that upsets a lot of my Hong Kong friends. I lived there for more than 20 years. That basically Jimmy was not the radical. He stayed there because we had employees there. We had 1,000 newspaper employees. I had people through me beg him multiple times. It's like a bad David Mamet play. Me going in to tell him to leave, him telling no, and then him telling what people had to get out. This is a very brave guy. And I think he's the type of guy that most Americans, you just like him. He's a good man.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will be following his case at the Washington Times and Sebastien. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you so much.